No.
All right, well, then I have us history after MLK's. First of all, y'all, it's not MLK's March on Washington. Okay, he was one of the leaders. There were a number of people who were speaking there. It was a March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. It was organized by Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph. Dr. King, of course, was one of the major speakers, but it was not his march. 3,000 faith leaders made their way from the MLK Memorial on yesterday to the Department of Justice to call out the same social injustices King and others spoke of in 1963 on August 28th. The rally and march not only reinforced King's moral crusade, but it shined a spotlight on Attorney General Jeff Sessions' attempts to undo long-fought protections for minorities. The marchers included ministers, imams, rabbis, other congregants who have watched the Trump administration roll back voting rights, health care, criminal justice reform, economic reform. Some were there to protest the recent racial violence and hate in Charlottesville, of course, organized by Reverend Al Sharpton and the National Action Network. Here's some of what folks had to say yesterday.
We wanted to say this nation is in moral trouble. It's immoral to try to take the vote from people that blacks and Jews and others suffered and died for. It's immoral to try and take health care from your mama because you don't like Obama. It's immoral to try and give a tax cut to the rich while we need infrastructure and jobs. It's time for moral leaders of all religions to get rid of their fear and their political laryngitis and speak up and stand up together.
Martin, it's 54 years later. What would your dad say? He would, you know, I don't know that I'm even equipped to say what he would say, but I know he'd be greatly concerned about what is going on in our nation, but he would be proud of the fact that spiritual religious leaders are coming together of all faiths to stand up for justice, to stand up for righteousness, and to stand up for truth and freedom.
You have to ask yourself one question. How are you going to achieve justice? How are you going to achieve equality? How are you going to achieve freedom? You can do it by marching, participating in marches just like these. You can do it by speaking out against the injustices of this country and of this world. You can do it by continuing to carry the torch from people like Reverend Al, from people like Reverend Jackson, from people like Mr. Michael Eric Dyson, and the many wonderful speakers that spoke here today. You have an opportunity. You can do it.
All right, folks, tomorrow on News One Now, we'll have a much more detailed report on the march. We had our 3 cameras there, so we'll show you a lot more that took place there as well. I want to go quickly to our panel here. The thing that I think was interesting is that the number of, cross-section of religious leaders. And again, Brandon, of course, you don't have any white conservative evangelicals there. And it's always interesting to me when I listen to white conservative evangelicals talk about faith and talk about these issues folks are concerned with, but they're never there for events like this. They're never there when it comes to police brutality. They're never there. I mean, folks talk about being pro-life, but when somebody is shot by an unarmed cop, they are more likely to stand on the side of the cops as opposed to the person who was shot. They were totally missing when it came to Laquan McDonald, even when the cops lied. And this is why people don't have respect for white conservative evangelicals, because they say one thing and their politics says another.
Well, I agree with everything you say. I don't think it's just limited to the white conservatives. I know my generation overall has an issue with religion in the church, and there's seeming, I guess, relevance to our generation. And in fact,
but there were a lot of millennials out there.
No,
so it's not like that.
No, but I'm agreeing with you. I agree with you. It's an issue that is not unique to the white conservatives, but is relevant, is definitely there. They're silent, and they're, you talk a lot about Paula White. She's one of, I think, Trump's, biggest white conservative supporters, and she's been silent, and you're 100% right. And I think it's, it's sad, but hey, what can you expect?
It is sad. And unfortunately, what can you expect? I mean, that's the sad reality, that we can't expect there to be any sort of moral fortitude by these individuals who make millions and millions and millions of dollars pilfering, a lot of times, our community, specifically when you talk about Paula White. And in terms of issues that really impact our lives, they are consistently missing in action. I'm sure hoping that many of us who have in the past given to these charlatans will wake up and finally say, maybe my money is better invested in my own community communities rather than within this church that absolutely not only does nothing for me, but specifically works against my interests.
Well, again, the biggest deal for me is when I hear individuals talking about serving the same Jesus. And when you're talking about social justice issues, criminal justice issues, it doesn't mean that you're going to agree with every single person who is speaking. It doesn't, because I don't agree with every single person who is speaking. But they simply are never there.
Right.
And it was, again, when Dr. King wrote his letters from a Birmingham jail, he was specifically talking to white clergy who was saying, hey, slow down, you're going too fast. And he's saying, yeah, it's real easy to say that when you're comfortable. It's just like when I was on ABC and Christopher Ruddy was talking about Arpaio. Dude, you don't get racially profiled.
Right.
So this is just sort of no big deal to you, but if you're black and Latino, you get racially profiled, you get a problem with an Arpaio.
And let's not even kid ourselves to even think that a lot of these churches are, in fact, care anything about racial injustice. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the Southern Baptist Convention in many ways was founded specifically in order to maintain segregation in terms of church, in terms of moving against church integration. So, racism is a part of the fabric of a lot of these institutions.
And I'll just say that the march yesterday was not, the March of Washington back in '63 or '64. Sharpton.
Well, first of all, I was. Hold on.
Let me get to my point.
It was 250,000 people.
Let me get to my point.
It was 3,000 yesterday.
Again.
Yeah, no kidding.
And all I'm saying again, it's the hyper-partisan nature of it. Reverend Sharpton goes. I think that may be a factor as to why you did not see.
No.
It was not. I listened to the speech yesterday. I listened to King's speech yesterday on the anniversary of it. His tone, even though he was calling out injustices, it was not the hyper-partisan nature that we see today. It was not. It was about issues. Kennedy once. Let me finish. Martin Luther King did not mention Kennedy once during his speech, but he was still holding him accountable to the issues and injustice. But nowadays, you don't have that type of
Brandon, let me help you out with something.
Help me something.
You're making a classical mistake that too many people make. Let me say it again. Dr. King was not the only person who spoke that day. No. On the pre-program, Myrlie Evers-Williams was supposed to speak. Myrlie Evers was supposed to speak. She was in Boston. Daisy Bates spoke. There was no woman who was actually on the actual official program. John Lewis gave a fiery speech. In fact, he did specifically talk about Kennedy. They specifically asked folks to dial back any mention of the president because of the civil rights legislation. There were many other speakers as well.
So
there were a number of fiery speeches. So Dr. King's speech that day was not the only one that was given that people heard. Dr. King's speech was the last speech that was given. There were some 17 speakers before him.
But as you mentioned, the overall tone of that speech was told not to be partisan in politics because it's beyond politics.
But Brandon,
it's about the issue.
No. It wasn't beyond politics. Let's be clear. Let's be clear. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was not beyond politics. It was very specific, a lot of different speakers. And yesterday, Sharpton wasn't the only speaker. Reverend Jackson spoke. You had Jewish leaders who spoke. You had others who spoke as well. You had different faiths who spoke. You had an imam who spoke. It wasn't simply just Reverend Sharpton. But again, though,
I see different tones.
But again, though, if Sharpton wasn't there, those white evangelicals would not have showed up.